With his dignified appearance, our second inductee looked like a preacher or maybe a college professor. But this American composer and musician is referred to as the father of the blues, the great W.C. Handy.
Life is like a trumpet. If you don't put anything into it, you won't get anything out of it. W.C. Handy, the son of former slaves, was born in Florence, Alabama, and later moved with his family to Clarksdale, Mississippi, where he immersed himself in the local variations of Delta blues. Handy's passion for music emerged early in life, and as a teenager, he mastered the cornet. A natural leader, Handy was soon forming bands and traveling throughout the U.S., performing at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, where the ragtime craze started. He later traveled to Cuba, where he learned the Latin rhythms he would later use in the tango section of his hit St. Louis Blues. W.C. Handy introduced the blues to the world and became one of the most celebrated composers and musicians in the early 20th century. Later, Handy would form a partnership with Memphis businessman Harry Pace to form a music publishing firm that would lead to the creation of an entire blues industry. W.C. Handy died in 1958 and was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx, not far from his home. That same year, a highly fictionalized film biography, St. Louis Blues, was released, starring Nat King Cole, Ella Fitzgerald, and other stars of the silver screen. From New Orleans, Memphis, and New York, W.C. Handy is memorialized in museum collections, public works of art, and through the Memphis Blues Foundation's W.C. Handy Blues Awards. In 1969, the U.S. Post Office issued a W.C. Handy stamp, and his legacy is celebrated each year during Alabama's W.C. Handy Music Festival.
To honor the music of W.C. Handy, performing his best-known work, the classic St. Louis Blues, Dr. Alphonso Sanders. I call him Maestro.
I hate to see that evening sun go down. I hate to see that evening sun go down. 'Cause when that sun goes down, see my baby done left this town. If I'm feeling tomorrow like I'm feeling today, oh, if I'm feeling tomorrow just like I'm feeling today, oh, I'm gonna pack my bags and make my getaway. St. Louis woman with a diamond ring, oh, she pulls that man around by her apron string. If it wasn't for her powder in her store-bought hair, you see that woman I love wouldn't have gone nowhere. I got the St. Louis blues. I'm as blue as I can be. Oh, that woman got a heart like a rock cast into the sea. Or else she would have gone and moved so far away from me. I love that woman just like a schoolboy loves his pie. Oh, like a Kentucky colonel loves his men and rye. I guess I'm gonna love that woman till the day I die. Jesse Robinson. St. Louis blues, I'm just as blue as I can be. Oh, I got the St. Louis blues, just as blue as I can be. You see, that woman left me, and now I'm feeling oh so much misery. I love that woman, just like a schoolboy loves his pie. A Kentucky colonel loves his minute ride. I guess I'm gonna love that woman until the day I die. The St. Louis Blues, y'all.
Yay! You all ought to just rock in your seat there for a moment. At St. Louis Blues, Dr. Alphonso Sanders plays all kinds of instruments. Didn't know he could sing like that too. I tell you, my feet couldn't be still. Thank you so much, I'm telling you. Accepting on behalf of his grandfather, please welcome current professor of physics at Texas Southern University in Houston, Texas, and president CEO of Handy Brothers Music, Dr. Carlos Handy, accepting for W.C. Handy. Oh boy, there he is. What a legacy.
Wow, this is heavy. Wow, thank you.
You want me to hold it for you?
That'd be great.
You got it? Okay, all right.
Good evening. I have to confess that I almost forgot to get here because I fell asleep and started dreaming about everything I wanted to say. And then I had to wake my wife up with 10 minutes to go and tell her, hurry, get dressed, we're almost late. On behalf of the Handy family, my wife, my lovely wife of almost 42 years, Dr. Maribel Handy, president of the W.C. Handy Foundation, we are touched by your including my grandfather in this tremendous Max complex, which is just spectacular. I was really dumbfounded. It was just impressive. You know, I always seize every opportunity to somehow share with you some aspect of my grandfather that really, in my mind, solidifies his claim to fame. And, you know, some people hear Father Blues and they think it means sire of the blues, and obviously he was not. We don't know who sired the blues. You know, recently there was this NPR, I think National Public Radio, airing of The Vanishing of Harry Pace, and there were a lot of factual inequities. And as we say in Texas, it really chapped my hide. So, and I've only been in Texas for about 17 years. So it's a stereotypical impression of what a Texan would say. So in my furor, I crafted an essay, sort of challenging some of the absurdities they made. But that NPR thing did serve one purpose. It clarified in my mind why my grandfather was so great. And what you have to understand, up until the blues, his blues were published, American music basically were adaptations of European music. Even Negro spirituals, even ragtime, right? Created by, you know who created it. My mind goes, if it's not an equation, I can't remember it. But they were all, they were all works of art in the European tradition, yes, performed by black performers, very well, obviously. So Handy appreciated from an early age that the blues had significance. But he lacked the conviction, if you want to call it that, to surmount the critiques by white society of his time and by educated blacks of his time. And I didn't really understand what educated blacks meant. Educated blacks meant university-trained blacks. And Harry Pace, who without him, my grandfather could never have really started his company. The remarkable thing is that they formed their company in 1913 out of Memphis, and they went all the way to Broadway. And in 1920, Harry Pace abandoned him. He abandoned him, took all the resources to form the first black record label, Black Swan. And the purpose of Black Swan was to have a venue for blacks to perform classical music. Because there were those, Harry Pace, W.E.B. Du Bois, and others, university-trained blacks, who felt that the way for blacks to assert themselves, to be the equal of whites, was to beat them at their own game, which is to become doctors, to become engineers, to become practitioners of the classical genre of music. That's great. What they wanted to do was to imitate what the white man was doing. They did not want to create. And that's where Handy steps in. Handy was not ashamed of his culture, was not ashamed of black music, and stood his ground. And I can honestly say that Handy was the first African American to champion Black is beautiful when it came to music. And so that's why he is great. And by himself, so it took him 40 years. I say Jesus spent 40 years in the wilderness. Handy spent 40 years living amongst his people, understanding the blues. And as the video emphasized, he went to Cuba in 1900. And we have to understand what that meant. Because in Cuba, the importance of Afro-folkloric musical inspirations towards Cuban music was established. It was advanced. It was light years ahead of the Afro-American folkloric traditions and its impact on American music. All the Hispanic forms, all the Cuban forms of music that we now know, contradanzas, danzones, danzas, rumba, la habanera or the tango, el son, they were all there already. So he goes to Cuba, and you have to understand that all these Cuban musical forms were already being composed by black Afro-Cuban musicians. So he goes there, and in Cuba, there was an intermingling of the racial cultures. So he goes there and says, golly, these guys, they all love this music. And it's inspired by Afro-Cuban traditions. Well, you know what? there's this musical form back in the USA that people are not appreciating. So when he comes back from Cuba, instead of going up to Michigan, I believe, to get a more lucrative job, he went to Mississippi. And in his autobiography, he says that some subconscious force drove him to Mississippi, the best place to learn the blues, because he realized that that music was not being communicated to the rest of the world. And that music, he instinctively knew, had equal value to the European traditions in American music. So he came here in Clarksdale. My father, his eldest son, was born here. And in 1903, he had the epiphany of the Tutwiler train station experience, where he, for the first time, consciously tried to understand the structure of the blues and maybe how to tinker with it a little bit so that he could more effectively communicate it to the rest of the world. And it still took him another 6 years till he went to Memphis and wrote the Mr. Crump blues. I'll tell you a joke. Well, I won't tell you a joke. Anyway, I do work for a state school, so I don't have to deal with that. So, but you can imagine. So he wrote the Crump blues. It was a big hit, and so he said, you know what? Let me write this as the Memphis Blues 3 years later, 1912, which became the first published blues. Then he was swindled out of the copyrights because the white publisher lied to him in terms of how popular the music was, so he sold the copyrights for $100. When he realized that he had been swindled, he said, okay, I'm gonna write something better. And he composed the Jogo Blues. Jogo Blues did not turn out to be the big hit he wanted. But, I had never heard the Jogo Blues. So I put it on YouTube and I said, wait a minute, that's the St. Louis Blues. Yes. So what he did, he created the melody of St. Louis Blues in syncopated form, in ragtime form, and that's what the Jogo Blues was. But it wasn't selling. And so a white, wealthy businessman from St. Louis said to him, I really like the Jogo Blues, but, it's not selling. So in one night, with 3 rambunctious kids, one of them being my own father, he went to a hotel in Memphis, and he said, I'm going to transform the Jogo Blues into something more earthy, from the soil, something in the spirit of what we now recognize as blues. So he, in one night, changed the key, adapted the lyrics, and the St. Louis Blues was born, the most famous blues of all time. The point I want to leave you with is all his compositions, certainly the most famous, are gems. They are iconic pieces of the jazz repertoire. But what he really represents is the first man, other than, Harry Pace, all these other guys, they wanted to imitate the standards of white society. Handy had the guts to say, black is beautiful, and my people's music is just as good as yours. And that's why he's a genius. And that's why he deserves all the recognition he's had. So my mouth is drying up. I get very emotional, but it's important that that aspect of his life be told. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for all this.